My name is Claire Halpin. I am going to be hosting this morning's event, which is Meet the Artist in the Studio with Ursula Burke. So I'll give just some introductions and maybe just to kind of also mention some events that are coming up with Laoghaire-Rathdown with the Arts Office. So I am the programmer of the learning program for the summer learning program, but also in relation to the exhibition Tangled, which is currently on at the Municipal Gallery at the Lexicon. Tangled is an exhibition curated by Michael Fortune with Southside Travellers Action Group. The exhibition features the work of Ursula Burke, who's joined us this morning, John Byrne, Alice Marr, Breda Mayock, John Power, Dermot Seymour, who worked in collaboration. Michael Fortune worked in collaboration with Stag, and he introduced the group to the work of several Irish contemporary artists, and it was from that the collaboration, the exhibition was selected and curated. And the selected artists and themes reflect this collaboration and engagement of the group with contemporary Irish artists. As part of this, we have Ursula Burke joining us this morning for the Meet the Artist in the Studio. For July, we will be meeting with John Byrne, and that's on the 9th of July. So this is the 6th of the studio visits that we have done, as in we've done one every month for the last 6 months. And it was a new program that we began obviously during lockdown. And each artist studio visit has, I suppose, taken a different format and taken a different slant. And we've met artists from all over the country, and artists have brought, I suppose, different aspects of their practice to the Meet the Artist in the Studio. So just as a prequel to Ursula isn't currently in a studio, but this is actually kind of part of her practice, the fact that she moves studio depending on residencies that she's undertaken. But that's something that she will be expanding on during her presentation. But it's that idea as well of how their studio is part of the practice, what part it takes, and I suppose the context in which they work, how that affects the work that they develop at a particular time. So Ursula Burke is an Irish artist who works in a variety of media, including porcelain, sculpture, embroidery, and drawing. Much of her fine art practice deals with issues of representation and identity within contemporary Ireland. She was recently awarded the Markievicz Award from the Arts Council of Ireland and the Decade of Centenaries Department of Arts and Culture. She had a solo exhibition at the Ulster Museum in 2020 entitled A False Dawn, and she undertook in 2019 an artist residency at the Centre Cultural Irlandais, Paris, which resulted in the exhibition A False Dawn. She's a winner of the Golden Fleece Award and the Visual Arts Ireland Suki T Award in 2018. She undertook an artist residency and group exhibition entitled So It Is with the Mattress Factory Museum in Pittsburgh. That was in 2017, and was awarded the Arts Council Northern Ireland British School at Rome Fellowship in 2014. This was a very, I suppose, a critical point in Ursula's development as an artist, and she's going to expand on that during this morning's presentation. Solo exhibitions include The Precariat at the RHA Gallery in Dublin 2018. This also moved to the Dock Art Centre in Leitrim, Carrick and Shannon. She had a solo representation at the Supermarket Art Fair in Stockholm with the Ormiston House in Limerick. That was in March 2017. Also with Ormiston House in Limerick, she presented Vestiges, which also travelled to the Una Young Gallery here in Dublin. She has undertaken in 2013, she undertook a major solo exhibition, Hope for a Better Past, with the MAC in Belfast. And with that, she also worked with the National Portrait Gallery in London on National Memories, Local Stories, that was presented in the same year. She's an associate academic of the Royal Ulster Academy in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Her work is part of the collection of the Arts Council in Northern Ireland, the Arts Council of Ireland, Linen Hall Library in Belfast, the Ulster Museum collection, the Office of Public Works, and the Harbour Commission Northern Ireland, and is also in private collections nationally and internationally. So that's just a brief biog. As Ursula's work is in the exhibition Tangled, that was the kind of connection to in inviting her to talk with us this morning. And she's going to be talking about the work that she has in Tangled and expanding on from that. So Ursula, I should have mentioned that we'll do questions and answers at the end. If anyone has any pressing questions as we go through, if you want to put them in the chat, and we can come back to them towards the end. But other than that, I think I'll hand over to Ursula.
Hi everyone, I'm delighted to be here this morning. Thanks to DLR Arts for inviting me to be here, and to Michael Fortune for having me in Tangled. I was really delighted to be part of that exhibition. If you can go and see it. It seems to be there's some beautiful work from the other artists involved. So I'm just going to chat a little today about the piece that I have in Tangled, and then move forward from that. I want to kind of explain the genesis of my work. For those of you who don't know the kind of work I make a lot of porcelain sculpture, embroidery, sculpture, drawing, kind of soft materials. I use a lot of textile materials in my work. So I'm going to describe the genesis of that, how I came to start working in that way. And then I want to talk about two exhibitions I've had recently, one in Centre Cultural Irlandais in Paris, and one in the Ulster Museum, which was a co-production. So it's called A False Dawn. So I'll just open my PDF, share my screen, so you can have a look at the images. So this first image is the piece in Tangled, and it's a piece called Rioter. And I made this piece, I did a British School at Rome Fellowship in 2014. I was awarded that from the Arts Council in Northern Ireland, and it's a really incredible opportunity to get. It's only based in the north, I'm afraid, so those of you who are working in the south can't apply, but it's an amazing opportunity. You get to spend 6 months in Rome. You're situated in this incredible neoclassical building, really centrally located in Rome, right across from the Borghese Gallery. And you're given a studio, and you're given materials, and your only objective is to go and research and work for 6 months. It was really an amazing opportunity. So when I was in Rome, before I went to Rome, I had started making work using porcelain. So to kind of just situate you in terms of the kind of work I make, I started using a lot of porcelain. I did a PhD in the University of Ulster, and towards the end of that, I had always had an obsession with the classical realm. Throughout my whole career, I've been obsessed with the classical, and I've always been trying to make a piece of work that mimics or comes as close to a piece of marble without carving marble. And I did a research visit one day to the Ulster Museum, and I was looking at the ceramics collection they had there, and I saw a piece of Parian porcelain, which to me, immediately looked like marble. And I just thought, I have to find this material, I have to figure out how to use it. So I did that. And then when I went to Rome, it was the most incredible place to be in terms of immersing myself, and obviously in the classical tradition. Everywhere you go, you see these incredible marbles, and I spent a lot of time across the road from the BSR in the Borghese Gallery, and it has an amazing collection of Bernini sculptures, Canova, Corradini, Michelangelo. And another tip for those of you who go to Rome is go into the churches. There's over like 700 churches in Rome, and they are just packed full of incredible art that's free. It's really, really amazing to look at. So yeah, I on one of my visits to one of these churches, I saw this incredible piece of sculpture. Sorry, something just fell over there. By an artist called Igor Miturai, and it was a sculpture that was placed in a basilica, Santa Maria Basilica. And I was really obsessed with that. I thought that was a really beautiful idea. At the same time, I had spent a long time, I've been working in Belfast for over 20 years, and I was looking a lot at the notion of representation within Ireland, contemporary Ireland, north and south of the border. And my experience of growing up in Ireland and then living in the north was very, very different. And there seemed to be like a cultural schism between the two, and how people expressed their identity and how they authenticated their identity was super interesting to me. So I was thinking a lot about creating this kind of conceptual bridge, and I'll talk about this a lot, and you'll see this in the work. It comes up again and again, and this will just situate you in terms of understanding the type of work I'm making. So everything in the classical realm is obsessed with the ideal in form, you know, so it's the, you know, these sculptures are incredibly beautiful, and it's all about the expression of the ideal. And in Northern Ireland, we were constantly immersed, you know, the rhetoric culturally and sociopolitically was constantly immersed in suspended notions of the ideal. You know, post-conflict, it was always talking about this potential ideal space that we can get to, you know, as a collective, as a community after the conflict, but it was always completely suspended, never truly realized. So I'm always setting up this kind of conceptual bridge between the two. So you'll see this sculpture looks like marble, it emulates marble, but it's embedded with lots of layers of the sociopolitical. So that will bring us to Rioter. This piece, I was hoping, you know, would emulate marble, look like marble, but at the time in Belfast in 2014, when I had, you know, gone from Belfast to Rome, there were lots of riots happening in the city. The unionist community were not happy because a British flag had been taken down from City Hall. There was lots and lots of rioting, and for me, this was kind of like a really contemporary image. The rioters no longer, you know, paramilitaries, rioters, all those kind of symbols that resonate about Northern Ireland. You think of the balaclava, but for me, that wasn't really a contemporary image anymore. It was more so about these young kids on the streets. They were wearing hoodies and masks over their faces, you know. And then the ironic thing is, like, that this work was made in 2014, and you know, now in 2021 2020, I never really truly understand how prescient this image would become, because it's an image that we're all so accustomed to seeing now, the masked face. So the next piece is similar to, you know, I made this work all at the same time, and this piece is called Balaclava Bust. And I had been doing a lot of research about, excuse me, sculptors who were working throughout antiquity. And I read a lot about this piece called Virgin with the Veil, and there's countless versions of this in existence. And apparently what sculptors would do to illustrate their trade, they would carve a virgin with the veil in marble. And this would illustrate, you know, how well they could handle the material, because trying to mimic lace or a veil or fabric in something hard and making it appear soft is incredibly difficult. So I thought, when I went to Rome, I'm going to try that. I'm going to see if I can do that. I really want to push myself. I want to really push my skills and see how far I can push this material as well, push the porcelain. So I brought one mold with me to Rome in my suitcase. That was it. And it was a mold of my daughter's head that I had painstakingly making, you know, back in Belfast. Took that to Rome and then cast this piece in porcelain. And then, you know, I developed this kind of new technique where I was making sheets of porcelain that acted like fabric, and then layered it over the top of the bust. And then I really wanted to, you know, again, I'm like trying to destabilize conventions around what we know about the material approach. So the bust looks like a piece of marble, but then it has this balaclava layered on top, so it becomes kind of hopefully more nuanced. And then these are just some examples of smaller pieces that I made in Rome. You know, being immersed in the city the whole time I spent so much time outdoors and researching, and the middle piece is based on Michelangelo's Moses. And I saw that in one of the churches, which I can't remember the name of the church, but I was incredibly taken by it. And I love the idea that the original is Moses is sitting in exactly the same pose, and he's holding the tablet, you know, he's just come down from the mountain. And I thought like a contemporary version of that is my Moses is sitting there, but he's holding an apple tablet in his arm, and he has this bag over his head. And the piece is about the place or role in religion, and you know how in society anymore how religion can become so divisive. So these little lambs kind of are moving around the bottom, and they've got these placards on their backs, and you know it's talking about kind of you know, how useful is religion really. And there's this kind of comic little bomb on the bottom, and I was just kind of exploring different ways to make porcelain and embed color in it as well. Like I'll talk about color a lot more. Color is really important to me in my work. The piece on the right is Papa Francesco, Pope Francis, and there was lots of these kind of little ephemera around the city, you know, that they were selling on carts, little resin ephemera that you could buy for a couple of quid and take home, you know. And I like to kind of use symbolism. I think about symbolism a lot, use of color a lot. You can see it in that piece. This last piece is something I made towards the end of my 6 months there. And I'd been back to Belfast, and then when I was back in Belfast, there was this Free Presbyterian minister at the time who was publicly kind of condemning the Muslim community. And then our first minister, which is essentially our prime minister, was, you know, agreeing with him publicly and saying how he wouldn't trust anyone from the Muslim community to even, they wouldn't even send them to the shops, you know. And I just thought, this is just horrendous. Like, these people are supposed to be representing us. And it was kind of this consistent form of collective wounding, you know. And the penny dropped for me then. I thought, gosh, like, I'm immersed in this community that's this place that's all about the expression of the ideal in form. And what would happen if I disrupted that convention and I placed a bruise or a wound on the surface? So I went back and made this piece. This is the first of that whole series of bruised porcelain busts. And I made that. And at the time I was trying to really grapple with the notion of identity as well, like situate it within place or to kind of impose signs or symbols of identity. So I stuffed the mouth with these kind of like very crude flags, you know. So she's almost been like, you know, suffocated by with the notion of identity. You know, and this piece worked to some degree, but I didn't like the flags. And once it was made, that was it. You know, when you fire something, that's it. So I exhibited it, but later I kind of improved on it. And this is just two, within the 6 month period in Rome, you have, at the end of each 3 months, you have an exhibition in the BSR. And this is some of the work that I've made situated in each of those two exhibitions. Okay, so this then, when I came back from Rome, is the next piece I made. So following on from the bruised bust with the flags, which I just thought that didn't really work, I kind of went back and revisited and thought, that's kind of an ugly metaphor, and it you know, visually it's not really working for me. But I loved the idea of the bruises and the wounds on the surface of the skin. So I came back to Belfast and made this piece, and this piece is called Bruiser, and it's a porcelain bust. And again, it's kind of relying highly, you know, all the tropes of that kind of surviving classical tradition. And it has this bruise and you know, a fat lip and a big eye, you know, bruised eye. So just going to, you know, whiz straight into a false dawn to say, you know, just to kind of like connect the dots. That last piece, Bruiser, I did a lot of projects. You know, I did a whole body of work, a series of bruised busts following on from that. And I did a project with Una Young in Dublin. She saw that and commissioned me to make a series of bruised busts for the centenary of the 1916 Rising. And you know, that work was shown then in successive galleries in an exhibition called The Precariat, which, you know, I moved through the years, and then I'm up to date really. I just wanted to show you guys then this work, which will include some of the bruised busts. So this piece, this exhibition is called A False Dawn, and it's a co-production between Centre Cultural Irlandais in Paris and the Ulster Museum. So it's Nora Hickey-Shilley and Kim Mulwiney, and these two curators, they worked with me, and you know, they met with me and said, you know, we'd love you to do something for us, and basically to respond to each space. We want some old work and some new work in each space. And so we worked for a number of years, over 2 years, kind of like coming up with a plan how to approach this. In 2018, I won a CPT prize, which gave me a residency in CCI in Paris, which was super. So in the beginning of 2019, I went and did an artist residency in Paris. And while I was there, I made a number of new pieces, which I'll talk about as we go through. So just to situate then, in terms of my thinking about this exhibition, I was really looking at the idea of insecurity. You know, thinking a lot about how pervasive the notion of insecurity is becoming in the kind of contemporary realm. You know, after the 1970s, you know, when all the kind of markets become more kind of open and liberal, and it seemed to me that the burden went from the state onto the individual. You know, so there was a heck of a lot more of a rising sense of insecurity, and we can feel it even more, you know, in terms of post-pandemic, if we even are post-pandemic. But it's a very real thing. And I was looking a lot at the notion of the precariat as well. Like, it's this new class of people who were emerging, who, you know, there was a time in our, you know, in our parents' lives, they have access to social housing, to jobs for life. And this is no longer the case. And, you know, this kind of notion of insecurity is so pervasive in our lives that it has repercussions. So I was kind of thinking about that just in terms conceptually, in terms of creating a framework for the exhibition. So this is, as you walk into CCI in Paris, this is the kind of an image of the exhibition. And this is from the other end of the gallery. So this piece is really kind of an important piece, actually. It's one of the first pieces I made when I was doing my residency in Paris. I love to kind of go out into the city. I always kind of spend a large part of my time on residency researching, you know, going, seeing things. There's nothing like it in terms of feeding your head. So I spent a lot of time in the Cluny Museum in Paris, and it's an incredible place. It has a series of 15th century tapestries, and the tapestries are of this lady and a unicorn, and they fascinated me because throughout the 15th century, everyone believed unequivocally that the unicorn was real. You know, that the Greeks considered them real, and in the 15th and 16th century, there was a period of time when there was a trade in powder and tableware made from unicorn horns, you know, and it was considered as an antidote to poison. And I love the idea. I was thinking a lot about how elusive the unicorn was. Like, it was this kind of figment, this kind of notional idea. And at the same time, I was thinking a lot about Brexit and kind of the potential damage that was going to perpetrate upon the Northern Irish community. And Brexit was being talked about a lot, but it was kind of this elusive notion again. It was kind of like this conceptual folly. So I wanted again to make some work about the kind of collective wounding, Brexit, all those kind of notions. So what I did was I went to the gift shop in the Cluny Museum, and they sell it at these cushion covers. And I bought one of these cushion covers, and on the surface was the lady with the unicorn and the unicorn itself. And I carved it up, and then I bought this truncheon, you know, online, and you know, got it posted to Paris. Covered the truncheon in the skin of the Cluny Museum cushion cover, and then hand embroidered over it these kind of like tears or drips, fissures or wounds. You know, you'll see that again in my work. It comes up again and again. And then on the head is this porcelain head, and it's kind of like bruised or wounded head. And the idea here was to anthropomorphize, you know, the truncheon. The truncheon becomes the body to the bust. And I like playing with that kind of symbolism. You know, the idea of a truncheon is something that wields power and bears down on the body, inflicts pain, wounds, you know. And also it's important to say, like, when I was in Paris, I was thinking a lot about, I'm making a lot of porcelain sculpture, I'm making a lot of embroidery or textile sculpture, but why don't I try and integrate the two, you know, like really to push the work forward. And again, like I'm always trying to destabilize the conventions around particular material approaches, you know, so embroidery is, you know, typically seen as an inane, domestic, kind of a decorative material approach. And what I try to do is I take that and I undercut that, destabilize that, and make it political, and embed it with the socio-political. So this next piece is a piece called Achilles' Heel, and it operates in the same way as Truncheon. I made those kind of one after the other, quite quickly after each other. And I was thinking again about the unicorn, you know, and I liked the notion of the unicorn tusk, you know, and the unicorn horn. And also I was thinking the Achilles heel is your weak spot. It's your vulnerable spot. You know, it's the spot that really, yeah, is your most vulnerable spot. And I was thinking about how kind of vulnerable we are as a society, you know, this notion of anxiety being so pervasive. So I got this kind of disembodied foot, and again, I covered it in the Ulster Museum cushion cover. And on the far right, you can see the unicorn head. And I wanted to kind of the horn to emerge out of the foot and continue up out of the foot. So it's almost like that it is the unicorn horn, or at some points it's like a lightning bolt, or sometimes you can kind of imagine that the foot has been impaled, you know, that it becomes this kind of site of wounding or pain. And again, and then I made these this out of the toe, the big toe. I cut off the big toe and then created this little piece of porcelain that was like porcelain threads. And I like the idea of the ties that bind, or the threads that connect us underneath the, you know, coming out of the foot. And then made these little porcelain nails that I attached to the foot. Again, and what I should say is, like, color is super important to me as well. I think about color a lot. I really tried to control my use of color. My palette tends to rest within a kind of a Renaissance Baroque palette. Sometimes I'll play with medieval, but I really like, it's one of the tools that I can use, that I try to harness, that situates the work within a particular art historical framework. And from that, then I build on or work forward. Okay, so this piece is a piece called The White Hand. And I have to admit, when I came back from Rome, I went into this period of like intense making. I made so much work in that period. I think in about two years, I made so much work. And again, I was thinking about, you know, the Virgin with the veil, I wanted to make a series of veiled sculptures. I like the idea of the notion of things being covered over, you know, sweeping things under the carpet, like thinking about the connection between the socio-political and the art historical, and how I could kind of layer embed the two. And I'm always setting up this conceptual continuum in my work. And again, like I'm literally doing the same thing over and over again in each piece. I'm creating this conceptual continuum whereby, you know, I slide backwards into antiquity, and so I'm invoking art historical references. You know, I'll like the classical or the Baroque or the Renaissance, and then I'll pull it into contemporary, and I'll embed or layer images from the contemporary onto the work, and then eject it up into some future potential possible realm. So I'm always somewhere on this continuum. And this piece of porcelain, I was thinking a lot about at the time, again, you know, notions of Northern Ireland, and the red hand of Ulster is a very potent symbol in Northern Ireland in terms of symbolism. And, you know, it has its roots in history and legends, and, you know, in relation to the creation of the sovereignty of that territory. And I'd seen it everywhere. You know, if you spend any time in the north, you're immersed in the material culture and of the streets, you know, like the murals and the curbstone paintings, and they're really potent. They're quite divisive, and the use of color as well in the north is incredibly interesting because everything is kind of like this binary. You know what territory you're in if you wander into somewhere, because you look at the curbstones at the red, white, and blue, you know where you are, or the green, white, and orange, you know where you are. So I was like thinking about that a lot, and I thought be interesting to pull, because that's so divisive. I thought if I could strip that, pull that color out, and reinvest it with a Baroque palette, or with no color at all. So in this piece, it's a little kind of a funeral piece of sculpture. It's a baby that's lying against, it's hard to see, but it's actually a little deer in the back. The baby's resting against a deer. You can kind of see the head. And just to the left of the baby's head is this little hand, this little disembodied hand. So the hand has been kind of cut off and it's laying on top of the veiled piece. And it's just an exploration, or it's a little, exploration of those kind of concepts or ideas about, the collective wounding and of Northern Ireland, kind of issues of identity and all those kind of really complex, nuanced issues. Okay, so this is a piece then that is called The Politicians, and it's kind of an abrupt jump from porcelain sculpture to embroidery sculpture, but I naturally, this is kind of not how I work. I work in these different mediums, and I do kind of create a connection between destabilizing both those material approaches, because when you think about porcelain, you think about, my granny had a front room that she kept for visitors, and it was full of those little tiny porcelain figurines, and they were just, people would come and give her gifts and she would collect them, and there were just these kind of like pretty inane things, and she had a great collection of cushion covers as well, and textile covers, and all of these kind of material approaches typically aren't really provocative in any which way. So my attempt in using these is really to try and destabilize conventions around those material approaches. So this piece is called The Politicians, and I'd been spending a bit of time online researching. I'm sure you've all seen them. There's a whole bunch of images. If you Google it, I'll go online, Google politicians fighting in Parliament, and the image results are incredible. A whole bunch of images come back, and of these actual documentary images of politicians fighting in Parliament all over the world. But what struck me immediately is how incredibly Baroque they looked. They looked like a Caravaggio painting. And the other thing to say is that, yes, I make sculpture, but I'm hugely influenced by painting. When I am suffering from a lack of ideas, I'll go to painting. I'll look at painting. I'm like, I think a lot about Caravaggio, Artemisia Gentileschi. I think a lot about, and then the surrealists as well, De Chirico and Max Ernst, Leonora Carrington, all those kind of people. I love painting. So this is a documentary image of politicians fighting in Parliament, and I took that kind of that circular format and hand embroidered that image onto the surface of it. And then when I was in Rome, I went to see Bernini's The Ecstasy of Saint Teresa, which really has such a huge impact, such an effect on me, And you walk into the church and you turn and look at it, and you have this moment of supplication, this moment of ecstasy where you're looking up, that was the impact that it's supposed to have on you. You're just like, wow. And all these beams emanating out of the sculpture, up and out of the sculpture. And I just thought, oh my gosh, I'd love to do something like that. So with this sculpture, it's actually situated on the wall quite high. So when you walk up to it, it's above your eye height. So you have to look up in that moment of supplication. And these wooden beams that, got made and installed onto the piece, kind of playing with that, playing with those, that kind of religious iconography, the beams emanating out of the piece. And then the threads that hang down, it was a formal device that I was playing with. I wanted to kind of see if I could make something 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional. And I like the idea as well, conceptually, you know, that within the frame, these politicians are so frantically trying to contain power, hold on to power, grab power. And, you know, inevitably that's just farcical. And so the power oozes out of the frame and down onto the floor, and the threads kind of act in that way as a conceptual device. This is a piece that I made when I was making the bruised bus. And I was just thinking a lot about the place and role of women within Irish society, you know, within the War of Independence, within the kind of, within the North, and Bernadette McCalskey, all these kind of incredible people. And it was kind of to situate the women back into the frame as the protagonist, you know, after the War of Independence, the kind of notion of the women's role had been whitewashed out, you know, once De Valera got in. And so I thought I might, you know, make a piece of work that played with those kind of concepts. So this piece is called Embroidery Frees the Politicians, and it operates in the same manner as the politicians. I actually started making this piece first, and I made this piece, gosh, I think around 2016. I've been making this piece of work for the last 4 years. At the minute, it's 8 panels, and each of the panels is a documentary image of politicians fighting in Parliament, and each of them are sourced from a different country. So you have Greece, Lithuania, Seoul, the rest I have written down on a list. So each are an actual documentary image. It's not a construction, it's not an invention, it is an actual documentary image that I take and I hand embroider. And then I liked a lot of things about this this piece. I like how there's an absence of women in the frame. You know, that again isn't an invention. It's kind of just representative of the paradigm that is women in Parliament. And again, I'm using that kind of conceptual device whereby the threads ooze out of the frame and down onto the floor. And I wanted to, again, you know, rather than make the piece 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional. So the objective with this piece is as I move forward, I'm going to continue to add panels to this. I've made another panel for this during the pandemic, and you know, I'd like to get to a place where maybe it's like 14, 15, 16 panels, and that I could install this piece in a room and that it would just continue to snake around. I was thinking a lot about the Bayeux tapestry. You know, there are art historical examples and how the Bayeux tapestry action goes from left to right and right to left and culminates in the middle. I really love that as a concept. So yeah, this is it operates quite similarly to the politicians. And then this last piece, this was a piece again that was actually quite new. I made this late 2019, quite close to installing the show in CCI. And you know, that was the objective that I work towards with Nora and Kim, that I would have some old work and some new work, and then you know, the objective is that I would really respond to the space, situate, you know, like put the work in the space and then respond to the space itself. So this piece is called Augur, and I'd been looking a lot at this incredible artist in America called Simone Yvette Lee. She makes incredible sculptural pieces, and she directly, you know, she negotiates or takes on the concept of identity. I also was thinking a lot about the bronzes throughout antiquity that have those kind of gemstones embedded in their eyes. And so this is a porcelain head, and I got these glass eyes. You can see it sort of in the far left hand, these blue glass eyes embedded in the head, and then created this kind of like this, you know, like circular structure, but it's kind of, you know, it's almost like a beehive, or it's like a little home, you know. It's kind of just a surreal object, and I like the idea of hanging it or suspending it from a beam. And that beam actually really helpfully, lovely, came out of a French farmhouse. You know, one of the people who worked in CCI she was renovating her house, and and brought me this beam from a French farmhouse, and it all kind of worked together quite well in the end. And conceptually, I was playing with the notion of an augur is someone throughout Greek antiquity who kind of looks up into the skies to read the signs, you know, through the flight of the birds, the flight path from the birds, you know. And this piece was situated across from the wall drawing, which I'll talk about as we move forward. And within the wall drawing, that's called augury of the birds, there's a lot of birds flying in the sky. So augury is kind of, you know, hanging there waiting to read the signs, you know, to see what the signs are. So this is a false dawn in the Ulster Museum. And again, you know, as I'd said, the kind of our working method was that I would make a new piece and show older work and then respond to each space. So for the Ulster Museum, I decided I want to make, you know, a new piece of work that I would situate quite close to the door. And this is, again, it's a device that I've used before in a lot of work. I like to place a piece of work sometimes close to the door, so it's almost like a provocation. You know, as you enter in, you're kind of like confronted with a piece of sculpture straight away, immediately. You know, this piece is called a Blue Sphinx, and you know, it's based on the it's based on actually a French Mannerist Sphinx. And I really like the concept of the Sphinx because it's placed at the entrance to the city of Thebes, and you know, you to go past the Sphinx, you have to answer a series of riddles, and if you get them wrong, you know, the Sphinx kills you. You're dead. That's it. And I like that again as a concept because everything that seemed to be going on within society at the time, within Northern Ireland, but also, you know, internationally. And that's important to say, like a lot of my work was situated because I spent so much time in Belfast, lived and worked there for over 20 years. I spent so much time there immersed in the city that a lot of the work came out of that, you know, was rooted in that, and the symbolism was rooted in that. But of late, you know, the work is really kind of being ejected outwards, you know. So I'm thinking more globally in terms of like how the concept of the sociopolitical works in many different realms around the world, you know, so America, Britain, all those different places. And this was a new technique for me. It was a new kind of formal approach that I'd come up with, using fleece wool and kind of like chunky fleece wool and knitting and hand knitting this fleece wool. So I create this interior structure and then I hand knit the wool over it. And then I had this bruise bust, this blue bruise bust. When I was starting to make the series of busts for the Una Young exhibition, which was then going to Ormston House in Limerick, I'd had this idea that I would make some of these busts using color because there's a whole, you know, I don't know how many people know this. I guess a lot of people know this now, but there's a whole tradition of polychromy in marbles, you know, so the marbles weren't, you know, always white, this ecstatic white. They were painted in antiquity with, you know, color paint, and that wore off throughout the generations, you know. And I loved that as a concept. So I was thinking, well, maybe I should make something that, again, that looks like marble, but it is embedded with color. So I made two of these busts, these blue busts, and then I had a studio visit, and the person who came, they were like, no, I don't like that. I don't think that works. You know, I really don't like that. And that kind of like unsettled me. And I thought, maybe it doesn't work. So I started to make a whole series of the busts, you know, with just white, looking really like marble. But I'd had this bust and another one in my studio for, gosh, years, maybe 3-4 years. So I pulled this out and I thought, this is perfect. You know, this is incredible how something rests in your studio for so long. And when the time is right, you know, it's made manifest into a piece of work. So her face was lying there and it was perfect. It became the head to the Sphinx. So she is at the entrance. She's guarding the entrance to the exhibition. And this is a still from the first room in the Ulster Museum. And so, you'll notice there's a lot of dripping on the walls, and I want to talk a little bit about that conceptually what I'm doing there. When I was in Rome, Rome is so fundamental to me, really, as you would imagine, someone whose work is rooted in the classical. I went and spent a lot of time in Palazzo Massimo. It's this incredible gallery in Rome, and on the top floor there's this incredible fresco. It's called Livia's Garden, and it's just like the most incredible, beautiful piece of work you've ever seen. It's all about nature in its most ideal form, so abundance, fecundity, everything working in its most ideal form. And that stayed with me, that it was like it imprinted on my brain, that piece of work. And I thought that I would love to kind of do something with that, make a replica of that, or not even so much a replica, but an approximation, something that was close to that. And again, I was thinking a lot about the political sphere and the kind of undoing of the political sphere, kind of how everything is and a dilapidation, it's breaking down, it's like an undoing of that. And so I was thinking I came up with this technique of almost like a flood, so if you imagine you walked into this Venetian palazzo that has been, the doors haven't been open for 100 years and there was lots of work inside, but there's been a flood, something's happened, there's been an occurrence. So that was the idea conceptually with this dripping, and I did the same effect in Paris, and the same effect in the Ulster Museum. So it's kind of like to create this scene. This is unnerving that something has happened. There's been an occurrence, and also when you get up close to that effect, it looks like tears, or it's like, yeah, an oozing or a weeping. I like conceptually all those kind of ideas. And what we're looking at here is a body of work of the bruised bust and the porcelain sculptures. And this was exhibited in the RHA in the exhibition called The Precariat. And it's just a series of porcelain busts that are bruised. And I made a whole bunch, really, like I worked so hard during that period. And then I got these custom pedestals made to put them on, and I really I like the idea, and I'm really adamant about the idea that you need to control everything when you're exhibiting a piece of work. You might make a beautiful piece of sculpture, but if you put it on a really nasty plinth, which we see a lot, it's such a shame. You need to be in control as an artist of every piece of that, so every piece of the work, top to bottom. And so I was thinking again of anthropomorphizing these busts. These busts need bodies, and I made these I designed these pedestals, and then I work with this incredible carpenter. He makes them for me, and there was this kind of series of busts, and it was like I like the idea of you walking into a room, and how sometimes, like, if you think there's been like something's happened, there's been an occurrence, there's really like something is wrong, you walk into a room and there's a bunch of people huddled in the corner. And as people do, as communities, as collectives, we huddle in 2s and 3s or 4s and 5s, and and we're kind of like, what I was trying to set up conceptually is that, again, something has happened, or they're waiting for something to happen, this kind of collective undoing or collective wounding. And they're on alert, these kind of disembodied porcelain faces, and you can see the kind of like the fragments, or they've been through something, because on the surface is the bruises and the wounds. I set it up in all the kind of this body of work I've exhibited in a bunch of different places. It's been in the RHA, the Galway Art Centre, in Leitrim in the Dock, and here in the Ulster Museum. It's going to London. Each time I kind of play with how the configuration of the busts are set up as a group. And so in this instance, in this configuration, they're kind of like facing off. There's two bodies of the busts, and they're kind of like facing off each other in almost like a confrontation. You'll notice as well that there's some black busts and there's some white busts. And when I started making this body work, I made a whole bunch of white faces, and which was fine, but I started thinking, I really need to expand upon this canon, like I need to address that. And I was looking a lot, backwards in art history, the kind of concept of the subaltern. I was looking at kind of black faces in terms of how they were constructed or made or represented or spoken about in terms of art history. And I then went to the Mattress Factory Museum in Pittsburgh, and I did an artist residency there. And I was part of an exhibition, and I thought, this is my opportunity to really kind of take this on, and I made a series of African-American faces. I don't think I have a detail. At the time, I made a series of African-American faces at the time. I have to be honest, it was a difficult thing to do because while I was there was the whole controversy about the Dana Schutt's painting of Emmett Till in the Whitney Biennial, and who has the right to make images of which community, who can speak to which community. But I'm glad I made these series of busts. You can see in the background then there's this little shelf behind those busts, and it's this piece called Born. It's a sculpture I made actually in 2014 for this exhibition I had in the MAC called Hope for a Better Past. And at the time I was reading a lot, and I read this sociologist Zygmunt Bauman, who's super interesting, and he had this concept that our identity is kind of formed at the moment of birth, because it's the foundation of the state sovereignty. And in that moment, in sites of extreme nationalisms, as Northern Ireland is, that your identity can be comforting, it's anchoring, it's part of who we are, but it can also be really suffocating, and I really wanted to explore that tension. So this baby is this little porcelain baby, and it comes out, with this little national flag in its hand, and again, I was thinking about use of color. I really stripped it of all color, but kind of put back in this kind of Renaissance palette, the ochres, the browns, all those colors we think about when you're looking at any of the great masters, really. And then on the baby's back, I made this. It's kind of like a little made up animal. It's a lizard with wings. It's just an absolute invention in porcelain, and it's lovingly embracing the baby, but at any moment could suffocate it. So I really like that tension in that piece. So here are just actually some details of the bruised bust work, and there you can see on the right is the detail of the African-American busts I made. I made 3 of them when I was on residency in Pittsburgh in the Mattress Factory Museum. And this is the next room in the Ulster Museum. You can see to the right the politicians. Far down the room is the truncheon piece, and on the wall is this piece called Augury of the Birds. It's another image. You can see again the politicians, the embroidery frieze politicians. Another image of the politicians installed. So this piece is called Pillow. And I made this again during that frenetic period. I don't know how I made so much work in that period, about 2 years. Porcelain, I really wanted to, I loved, again, Rome. Rome is just so foundational in terms of my work. When I was visiting all these churches, I was seeing and noticing all these religious relics, and how they were being handled and fetishized, and how people would kind of come in and, can't wait to see them or be close to them. And I really I was taken by that idea. And I love this notion of absence and presence, like a chair is not just a chair. If a chair is sitting there, it connotes absence and presence, both those things. And I was thinking the same about a pillow, when somebody lifts their head from a pillow and the impression that it leaves, it's kind of that kind of beautiful sympathetic concept. I like that a lot. And I was thinking about it as a religious relic. So that conceptual continuum comes back into play again. I was kind of placing this piece within antiquity. It looks like a piece of marble. It's this pillow. It also kind of wrestles with the notion of a relic. But under the sleeve of the pillow, I don't know if you can see it quite well in this image, I made this little porcelain iPhone. I made a rosary beads and a little flag, you know, and I was taken at the time. My mother always went to bed and put her rosary beads under her pillow. And my sister always went to bed and put her iPhone under her pillow. And, you know, and I was thinking, how do we construct meaning, you know, in terms of our identity? Oftentimes, you know, it's through our phones, you know. We can invent new identities, we can construct new identities online, we can become one thing or another. We can always also see things around the world quite immediately through the phone. And I was thinking, you know, what is really the place and role of religion in Irish society now, given the success of, you know, abuses of power? So yeah, that was another piece that I made during that period. Yeah, so this piece called Augury the Birds, and I've made this again in many different venues. It's quite a labor-intensive piece. The first time I made this was in Mattress Factory Museum in Pittsburgh, and I just tested it out. The Mattress Factory is super for that. They actually advocate when you go on residency there. They tell you, like, we want you to do whatever you want, you know, like just do whatever the heck you want. They gave me a space and they told me that the last artist there was Janine Antoni, and she ripped a hole in the floor, suspended a tree between the two floors. And she was like, and they were like, okay, so now you do whatever you want. And I was thinking, God, the pressure is intense. You know, I need to, like, Janine Antoni, who was a god to me when I was in art college. And I was thinking, oh my God, like I need to come up with something. So I had been thinking about, anyway, before I went to Pittsburgh, that I wanted to test, I wanted to kind of play with, really take on an approach that the notion of the fresco in Palazzo Massimo, you know, Olivia's garden. And I tested out, I kind of came up with an idea how technically I could do it, what the material approach was. I tested out and it worked, you know, it wasn't to this scale. And then the next time I did it was in the RHA, which was a colossal wall. And from that point on, I've been kind of making this, I call it a wall drawing. It's probably more accurately a painting. But it's a version of Livia's garden. Technically, you know, it is Livia's garden. The elements within the frame are Livia's garden. But my approach to it, how I think about it, is it's like a dilapidation of the original. And, you know, the classical ideal, within the classical realm, it is about the ideal and form, but also when you think about notions of the Republic, like Plato and all those, it's also about the socio-political, you know, the political realm. So I wanted to kind of really take that on board and reference or kind of come up with a concept that would kind of look like an undoing or unraveling or a dilapidation, or ask some questions in relation to the success or failure of the political realm. So I love that idea. You know, if you ever have a black and white photocopy and of something, you know, when you're in my day in art college, you'd go in and you'd photocopy something out of an art book, and you might fold it up and then you put it in your jeans pocket and you forget you have it in there, and you wash your jeans, and then a week later you take it out and it's kind of like all, you know, faded and folds in it, and it is a copy of the original, you know, 3 or 4 generations later. So this version of Augury the Birds of Livia's garden it works in that way, you know. So it's a 3rd or 4th generation copy of that. This is a detail of it. So technically, like formally, what I'm doing is that I make this drawing just using acrylic paint. That's it, and water, blue acrylic paint and water. And it's various different washes, you know, which I create depth and I create different layers. And then within the original, you know, in Palazzo Massimo, everything is full of color. You know, if you have seen this, great. If you haven't, you have to go and see it, or even look it up online. The original is just bursting with color. You know, it's like everything is oozing. It's all about abundance and fecundity. It's such a gorgeous piece of work, and it snakes all the way around the room. But in my version, again, I just thought I'd strip it of all color and reinvest with this kind of like a Raphael blue, like thinking about the Renaissance again. And instead of everything being bountiful, everything is kind of breaking down and oozing. So the fruit is disintegrating or weeping or being broken down. And there's birds in the sky. I don't actually have a still of that here. There's birds in the sky, and they're crying, you know, their eyes, there's, you know, tears coming out of their eyes, or they're breaking down. We don't really quite know. Everything is kind of breaking down. And then when I was in CCI, the first version of this that I did in RHA, I didn't include these little mirrors at all. But in CCI, I did this version, which I did include these mirrors. I was thinking a lot when I was on residency in Paris about, you know, a lot of the conversations that were being had about Brexit and its relationship to Ireland, you know. And I noticed that especially internationally or within Britain, that these tropes were kind of emerging again, that the Irish were kind of dumb and stupid, you know, these tropes that persisted throughout the colonization of Ireland, you know. And I also noticed as well that a lot of conversations I was having with people who weren't from Ireland, I always had to create a historical context for them so they could understand the meaning or relationship to what was happening in Ireland at that time. You know, so it was always this kind of looking backwards to make meaning of the present. And I started thinking, gosh, that's really interesting, you know, like this idea of looking backwards, conceptually looking backwards. So I used to walk my dog a lot at the time in Stormont. You know, for those of you who don't know, that's the seat of government in Belfast, Stormont. And there's this long walk down Stormont up to the, you know, the building. And I took this circular mirror with me one day, and it was a really cold day, and I had these gloves on, and I started to take these photographs just on my phone, you know, the mirror looking backwards up at Stormont. And I thought, gosh, they're super interesting. I'm going to try and see if I can embed those within the wall drawing. And when I did it, you know, the gloves started to become almost like paramilitary, or they had this kind of like ominous kind of effect. And I liked the idea of the looking back, you know, these little hands start to emerge through the bush within my invocation of Livia's garden. And yeah, I liked how they operated in that way, like the kind of collapsing time. Again, I'm like bringing that conceptual continuum back up again, you know, so it's moving backwards and forwards in terms of time on that continuum. And yeah, this is Augur again, installed in the Ulster Museum. It was a little space to the left of the main room. So this is kind of up to date where we are. Just to show you kind of what I'm working on now, I decided like it's kind of a natural progression. I've always been obsessed, you know, I talked a lot about the Cluny Museum and the tapestries. So I've always been obsessed with tapestry as a concept, and I thought, oh, gosh, I'd love to make a tapestry, you know, like a fine art tapestry. Like, how the heck do I do that? You know, I want to know how to do that. I want to figure that out. So I spent ages researching during the pandemic. I thought, now's the time, let's do this. And then I got this loom. It's kind of like a semi-professional loom. It's a really good loom, but it's not a major professional loom, you know. And I started to work towards making this tapestry. And it's coming along. Conceptually, what I'm doing is I'm really interested at the minute in the notion of populism, you know, kind of like how this is becoming this new, it's so pervasive, and we can witness it all around the world at the minute. And so I like the idea as well. Like, I didn't talk a lot about it, but surrealism is a huge part of my work, and you can see it in lots of pieces. You can see it in the piece Born, the little baby piece. It comes up and up again. So I'm kind of playing with surrealist concepts within the tapestry. And yeah, kind of playing with signs and symbolisms, and how they kind of vibrate. And you can see color again. I'm using kind of color in a really restrained way. I spend a lot of time thinking about color. So yeah, I think that's it. That's the end of my presentation.
Ursula, that's fantastic. As with all of these Meet the Artist, I always forget that there's other people in the room, because it's kind of this strange kind of format where you kind of go, oh, I think this is just me here listening. There's so much in what you've spoken about there, and it's like there's so many themes weaving through all of the work, and like I was familiar with your work and had heard you speaking about the False Dawn, that exhibition, and I suppose that idea as well of where the work had moved, and your consideration of the space, and how it's not just, oh, we're just moving it here, we're just putting it there. And I suppose one of the things I was interested in was how that piece, the Olivia's Garden, that work in itself was something that was taken from a Venetian palace and brought to the museum. So there's that kind of connection as well. And just from a personal point of view, I had actually only seen that piece, the Olivia's Garden. I'd only seen it in Palazzo Massimo, I think about a month before I actually saw your version of it
Oh wow,
in
that's
your
great.
HA. So there was that, I was like, that is probably one of the most incredible installations I've ever seen. And then I just saw it stripped of colour. And so it had that immediate effect. And there was also that thing, well, as I said, personally for me, where it was my first time to go to Palazzo Massimo, and I saw the bruised boxer. And actually,
Yeah,
in
that
a
piece is
weird,
amazing.
in a weird way, actually, when I saw the bruised boxer, it made me think of your work. So there was this
Great.
weird connection where I'd seen the bruised boxer, it made me think your work. Then I didn't realize you'd done this other piece. So that's just my personal instantaneous response to. Um, so thank you so much for the generosity of your time, and just
No
the
bother.
what a comprehensive just overview of all of the aspects of your work. So what I'll do is go, if anyone has any questions or responses, if they would like to either virtually put up their hand. I see in the chat so Marie Hensey, who was our last Meet the Artist. Exquisite storytelling, really beautiful presentation. Thanks, Marie. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
So if we go from Cork City, we're really interesting presentations. So thank you so much. So if thank you for those. Nadia from Sligo here, really great to know more about your work. Did you find the production of work increase? Sorry. Did you find the production of work increase depending on the location of studio residency?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Nadia. Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes. It's like when you're on residency, which I recommend so much, because you're feeding your brain so much that like it lasts through the years. But I see residencies more like productive oftentimes in terms of immersing yourself in the city, and like just absorbing the material culture, the art history. It depends on the city you're in, wherever, or you could be in a remote location, even if it's just reading books. Feed your brain. But oftentimes I've found on the residencies that I'm at, it's hard, it's difficult to get the materials that I need. So I will still make, I will push myself to make. I always have made. But I think the most productive I've ever been was that period when I had a studio in the top floor of my house in Belfast. Like I made so much work within those couple of years, oodles and oodles and oodles of work, because I could control everything. I had a kiln in my dining room, which was madness, but it worked. So I could go from the top floor down the stairs into the dining room, fire something, and and I could produce it like really quickly. So I think, like, to be super productive, I think you need to control the variance, a lot more, and have at arm's length the things that you need. But on residency, like, I think my emphasis has always been more about feed my brain and then make, you know, and you'll see in Paris I made these smaller pieces because I couldn't get access to the materials I needed, and also I thought about bringing them home as well. I could put them in my suitcase, so it just depends.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Maybe the way that nearly kind of the impact or the influence of the residencies like takes years to kind of filter through, and nearly kind of
Yeah,
that you go, oh, that actually came from that. But like you say, that as you said, the intense period of making that followed the residency when
yeah.
that you were back in, and it was like I said, it filtering through. Um, anyone else have a question there? No. Okay. I will just go to just to say, Ursula, thank you so much. As I said, with everyone else, I found it fascinating. I'd heard you speak about the False Dawn exhibition, but just to hear that kind of overview was absolutely fascinating. And once again, for our audience with the Dunleary and the wider extent, that getting to see a different practice, a different studio practice, and like even kind of the placing of that, and I suppose the temperament of that, of like that a studio isn't just necessarily in one place at one time, and it's really kind of, I suppose, it expands our understanding of an artist's practice and how they might work. Just sorry, just another comment there. Sorry, wonderful presentation. That's from Andrea Kavanagh. Thanks, Andrea. Just so interesting. So this has been recorded, and Pia will do a little bit of editing on some of my ahs and ahs and oohs at the start, and then will be put up sometime during next week. And just to mention our next studio, our next Meet the Artist in the Studio, so I just got the date here. Our next Meet the Artist in the Studio will be with John Byrne, which I wrote down the date. Yes, here it is. It's on Friday, the 9th of July. So we're trying to kind of time them as usually being the the first Friday within the month. So that will be John Byrne, whose work is also included in the Tangled exhibition. So just leave me to thank everyone for joining us this morning, and we look forward to seeing you all next month. And thanks everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Enjoy the rest of your weekend.